We appreciate all of the guests who have appeared on our show and sincerely thank them for providing you, our audience, with useful information. However, the advice our guests provide is theirs, and we encourage you to seek out a professional if you have specific questions about any topic we cover on the Crushing Debt Podcast. On this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast, Debt During Divorce.
Welcome to the Crushing Debt Podcast with your host, Florida attorney Shawn Yesner, where our goal is to help you get rid of the financial bullies in your life.
So welcome back to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. My name is Shawn Yesner, owner and founder of Yesner Law, and I have a great guest for you this week. Before I get to her, I do want to give a plug to our sponsor, Sam Cohen with Attorneys First Insurance. So if, like my guest, you are an attorney or if you're a title company and you want to get a quote, a competitive quote on your errors and omissions insurance, E&O insurance, malpractice insurance, all the same thing, give my friend Sam Cohen at Attorneys First Insurance a buzz. Sam's information is sam@attorneysfirst.com or www.attorneysfirst.com, and that's all he does is write malpractice insurance for attorneys and title companies. He is in Florida, but you don't necessarily need to be. He can either write you insurance wherever you live, or he can find an agent in your area to write you insurance where you live. He is a fountain of knowledge, a wealth of knowledge all about malpractice and all those different issues that may plague some attorneys and some title companies in the area. But that is our sponsor, Sam Cohen at Attorneys First Insurance. I do want to go ahead and introduce my guest. I'm really excited. I've been asking her to be on the show here for a little bit, and so I'm really excited to have her on the show. So she is a trial lawyer practicing high-level criminal defense and family law and divorce in Florida. She's also a certified divorce coach, setting her firm apart from others in the area by bringing a coaching piece to her law practice to help her firm's clients through the emotional aspects of divorce. In addition, she is a certified Insight Life and Success coach and in the process of being certified as a Jack Canfield Success Principles coach and trainer. She's an experienced trial lawyer, business owner, adjunct professor, mentor, coach, speaker, and mother. Definitely a powerhouse in the industry. She brings her unique perspectives and experiences into her speaking, mentoring, and coaching programs. In addition to delivering persuasive arguments to juries, she's delivered presentations at schools, business conferences, leadership conferences, legal seminars, classrooms, and workshops. With the powerful tools delivered through her presentations and coaching, she wants to help and inspire her audiences and clients to be the best people they can be so they can lead a happier, healthier, and fulfilled life. She's been featured on national and local television as well as local news publications in the Tampa Bay area. Welcome, my guest, Shiobhan Olivero. Welcome.
Thanks, Shawn. Thanks for having me. I'm glad we could finally do this together.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that a lot of people ask me about back in the day when people said, we need to stop foreclosures. We need to get rid of foreclosures. And what I kept telling them is, getting rid of foreclosures is getting rid of the effect. If you want to get rid of foreclosures, you've got to get rid of all the stuff that cause foreclosures, like medical issues, like loss of job issues, like divorce issues. So if you really want to stop foreclosures, we got to stop divorce. And unfortunately, money issues, monetary issues are probably one of those things that cause a lot of divorce. So I know there's a lot of misconceptions about divorce law and debt. So what are some issues that you have to work with your clients in terms of when the spouse has made the decision, or even maybe before the spouse has made the decision that it's time to get a divorce? What are some of the debt issues that come up?
So one of the common misconceptions that I get, Shawn, is that it matters whose name the debt is in. And in divorce law, it actually doesn't matter whose name the debt is in. And when we're looking at marital assets and marital debts, so both assets and debts inside of a divorce, when we look at equitable distribution, if it was obtained during the marriage, it is a marital asset or a marital debt, no matter whose name is on it, whether it's one party, both parties, or not.
So for those people that don't know, what is equitable distribution?
So equitable distribution is what the court looks at as far as all of the stuff that's been acquired during the marriage. And so that is all of your assets, your house, your car, if you've got things that are notable like art or jewelry, any of those things, as well as all your household items. And then all your debts, your credit card debts, your loans, your mortgages, student loan debts, all of those things that are accumulated during the marriage. The court has to, divide all of that stuff up. And so that's what equitable distribution is in the course of a divorce, is dividing up the stuff.
Okay. So I know, you and I are in Florida, you and I practice in Florida, and I will give the common disclaimer that if you're listening to the show and you're not in Florida, this stuff might not apply exactly to you. But generally, do you know how much of a common theme are these things from state to state, or is every state different and you just got to find an attorney locally and figure out what applies to your state?
So it is state to state, but generally there's one of two ways that it gets distributed. One is by the equitable distribution that Florida does, which is where we are. And then I know there are some states that do like community property, and I'm not wholly familiar with that because Florida is not community property type of state in the division that we are in. But that's really kind of the two ways that it goes state by state. So Florida being equitable distribution, it is driven by our statutes. Our statutes talk about equitable distribution, what that looks like, what all is included in equitable distribution, and how it gets divided between the parties. And so what I talk about in equitable distribution that I'll hit on really quickly, because it's important that I go there, and I even do it in my own divorce workshops, is that language matters, right? And things that we say matter. So it's important for me to say that I am saying the word equitable distribution, and I am not saying the word equal distribution when we are talking about the splitting of assets and liabilities.
Yeah, and let me give out some of the links that you've given to me, and I'll get all of them here in the show notes. So if you're listening and you want to contact Shiobhan, I'll have all the listings there. But it's Olivero Law, so OLIVERO law.com, or you can email her info@oliverolaw.com, same spelling there. And then you mentioned a divorce workshop, which is divorceworkshopfl.com. So what is that divorce workshop?
That divorce workshop is an everything you need to know about divorce from A to Z, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's actually a workshop that I put on every single month here locally. So I do it here the second Saturday of every single month, and it is. I've had so many people come and say what great information it is, and why isn't it recorded and put out there as a course and online. So I ultimately decided to do that. So it's a 3-hour workshop that I do, and I do the legal aspects of divorce, everything you need to know that is covered in a divorce from the legal aspect of things. I have a certified divorce financial planner that also talks about everything you need to know financially about a divorce. And that's everything from preparing for divorce, going through divorce, and then after divorce, and budgeting and planning. And then I have a certified divorce coach that comes in and talks about all of the emotional aspects of divorce and the things to consider emotionally for you and your children and the other person going through divorce.
Is it a paid workshop, a free workshop?
So the course online is a paid workshop. It's $47 online. The workshop that I hold in person, the second Saturday of every month, is currently a free workshop for anybody here in the community.
Okay, and they can find both of those, anyone who's interested, at divorceworkshopfl.com.
Well, that is solely to the paid course.
Okay.
But my Facebook page will have any information to the monthly workshop that is held in person.
Okay, and you've got a couple different Facebook pages as well. So you've got S. Olivero Law on Facebook. You've got Shiobhan Olivero Speaks. And then this other one, I may not understand it or butcher it, but the Shiobhan, is it?
Sapples Olivero. Yep, that's my personal page. So
okay.
Yep, the S. Olivero Law is the Olivero Law page, and then SOS Speaks is always my speaking and coaching page, and then my personal page. Okay,
and so the law firm's Facebook page is S. Olivero Law on Facebook. The other page is Shiobhan Olivero Speaks, and so it's SHIOBHAN Olivero Speaks. That's the other Facebook page. And then again, the workshop, divorceworkshopfl.com. And we'll also give out, there's Instagram links, there's LinkedIn links, there's YouTube links. So we'll give those out as we go as well. But I want to turn back to equitable distribution for a little bit, because one question that always comes up in my world, in the bankruptcy world, in the debt world. So you have the divorce court that says the husband is responsible to pay the credit card debts, even though the husband and wife are jointly on the credit card. So part of the equitable distribution, the divorce court will say, husband, you're responsible to pay the credit card debts. And while I agree with you that the court can make the husband responsible to pay, I mean, you know that better than I do, the creditor, though, says, well, wait a minute, both husband and wife signed on this credit card agreement. So while we appreciate what the divorce court said, we don't really care what the divorce court said. If the debt goes into default, husband and wife own it jointly because you both signed. And so then the husband may stop paying. The credit card comes after the husband and wife. The wife says, wait a minute, husband was supposed to pay this card. What are some things that the wife can do in a scenario like that, if anything?
Well, inside of the divorce, there's really the only options are contempt motions that we can go to court and hold the husband in contempt and try to force him to pay and get sanctions against the husband for not paying. So that's really the only options inside of divorce on what you can do. Of course, I try to work out in any divorces that I'm handling when we have that situation. And like you said, John, yeah, we put in the hold harmless agreements and all of that in the marital settlement agreement. But like you said, the credit card company's like, yeah, so what? You're still on the hook. But we also try to work out that, there's a specific amount of time that the husband has to call and remove the wife from the credit cards and, get her name removed and get all of those things so that from that point in time, that if he goes into default, she's no longer necessarily going to be on the hook once her name is removed from the card. So really it's about setting up the right plan and to make sure that he or she, whichever way it's going to go, right, is actually removed from the debt and removed off of the card. So, whether or not the credit card company holds them liable for any past debt, if it goes into default, that's, then again, the only option is to come into court on contempt. And of course, and then coming and talking to you potentially on bankruptcy, if that's going to be something they need to consider. Yeah.
And so one issue that I deal with a lot too is if that happens with a mortgage, I assume it's easier to call a credit card company and say, hey, need to get the wife off, need to get the husband off. But with a mortgage, I don't think it's that easy. And so that causes some problems in my world. What I've suggested a lot of times to divorce attorneys, if the couple qualifies for a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, we don't want to do a Chapter 13 because we don't want them tied to each other for another 5 years. Although kids may do that and there's some other issues there. But if they qualify for a Chapter 7 and they are amicable enough to participate together, then let's file a 7 for both of them jointly while they're still married. Get the debts discharged, get the debts eliminated. Then I can give it back to you to get them divorced, to get the order of divorce. And then they start free from each other and free from each other's debts, again, with the only exclusion being if there's kids involved. So a lot of times, if a couple is amicable in the divorce and they can be together in the same room amicably, that may be a good solution. We just wipe out everything with a Chapter 7 if they qualify, and then it goes back to the divorce attorney or divorce attorneys to get the divorce done. What other issues come up? What other debt issues can come up in terms of a divorce?
One big one that you mentioned and that you're right does become an issue in the divorce is the mortgage, right? Many times it's the stay-at-home mom who wants to stay in the house and raise the children through high school, and the father's not going to stay in the house. He's got to go find another place to live. So that becomes an issue on what's going to happen with that mortgage, because is it fair that the husband has to stay on the mortgage when he's not going to be living in the house, but we know that the wife can't refinance because she's been a stay-at-home mom and she has no income and it's going to take time to get income. And so what's fair? So it's dealing with that type of an issue a lot on the mortgage, on what do we do? And then how do you have those protections in place let's say though it is going to be the wife that stays in the house, what can you do to protect her in case husband doesn't pay the mortgage, right? And then the house does go into foreclosure and those types of things happen. So that's one of the biggest issues that come up when we're talking about debt and equitable distribution.
A similar issue, how about cars? How are cars dealt with in this equitable? Because it's a similar concept in terms of, my wife and I are jointly on what we say is, quote, her car, but we're jointly on title and on the debt. So are cars treated sort of similar to mortgages and credit cards?
They are exact same kind of treatment that they have. It's easy enough to get somebody, one, off the deed of a house, and then also two, off the title of a car, right? That's just two people signing and, getting their names off of the other one. But it is the debt when they're both on it that is a little trickier. Cars are a little easier to finance. They're not as much of a mortgage.
Right.
So getting the other person off of a car can be a little easier as far as the refinancing goes. And so that becomes an option. Also, it also just depends on what's going to happen with the other person. Do they have a large lump sum of money that they can use to pay off, the debt loan? Are they going to get a lump sum in alimony, or, are they going to get a lump sum out of the equitable distribution from any other type of investments or money somewhere that they can use to pay down all of those debts and then separate without having names on the debts? And if they don't have that, then it's the same type of thing that we work out with the protections in place on what do we do for the person who can't necessarily refinance this, but we need to get, this person's going to be responsible for the debt and we need to get the other person's name off as soon as we can, and what protections are in place for them if we can't do that in a reasonable amount of time.
Right. I assume the big one, IRS debts, I assume those are also similarly treated, although will the IRS be forgiving in a situation where husband and wife may have joint debts, but if the wife didn't work and the husband worked the entire time, it's still joint and several liability. Will the IRS give at all there to say, hey, wife, we know this tax liability wasn't necessarily yours because you didn't work? Or is the IRS going to say, we don't care, we want the money?
I don't do tax law. And I don't get involved with the IRS, right? So in those situations, I do have tax lawyers that I send people to say, here's the situation. It's going to be this person's responsibility, the debt, or this person's, or here's how we're going to split it. And, you have to go talk to a tax attorney to figure out how to work that out with the IRS. And I believe it's the same, though, that the IRS doesn't care what the divorce says, right?
Right.
But I can't say that 100% for certain, because I am not a tax lawyer and I try not to deal with the IRS as much as I can.
Right. No, that's me too. even though I deal with debt, the less I can, deal with the IRS, probably the better. So one of the things we talked about, one of the points we talked about discussing was how to protect yourself in terms of the equitable distribution. And I assume there's a couple issues in there, probably a prenuptial agreement or maybe a postnuptial agreement, or is that what we're talking about when we talk about how to protect yourself, or are there other issues in there?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways. Prenuptial is one way to protect yourself, right? So if you're coming into the marriage with a significant amount of assets, anything that you come into the marriage with that you had pre-marriage is going to be a premarital asset. But then we run into issues, and that's where equitable distribution gets a little confusing as well. So for instance, if you came in with like an investment property, right, and that investment property is going to be premarital, but there's potentially some part of the equitable distribution that's going to come from the income derived from that property during the marriage, as well as it works on the same on the marital home, if there's any appreciation in value of the home, appreciation in value on investments, appreciation in value on any of those things that you're coming into the marriage with, the other party gets the appreciation value. And there's some caveats to that I won't go into on the legal basis, but that's the general idea. So protecting the prenuptial agreement and protecting that, I'm coming into the marriage with this, so I'm going to leave the marriage with that, right? So you can protect that in a premarital agreement or a prenuptial agreement. Postnuptial agreements are a little trickier because most people don't start to think about postnuptial agreements until they start thinking about divorce. And the tricky part of a postnuptial agreement is that you can't make it in contemplation of divorce. Okay. So those get a little trickier, and but you can do them after marriage if you start to go, oh, maybe I should have done this beforehand. So prenuptial agreements are one way to protect yourself for both the debt and the assets. You can contract those rights of who's taking what and when. And there's some fairness things that have to be considered, but that can wait. Another way to protect yourself from the debts when you're looking at a divorce, there's not a whole lot of ways inside of it outside of the prenuptial agreements. But when you're dealing with inside divorce, like I said, in the marital settlement agreements, we try to work through some protections that we can give the other party, or like the party I'm representing inside the marital settlement agreement. But like you said, that's a little tougher because credit card companies don't necessarily honor those marital settlement agreements. But we still try to do that, and try not to have to come back to court on contempt motions, and try to work through those things before the divorce is even finalized. So if we can say, Sean, if you and I are married and getting a divorce, and we can say before it's finalized that, you're taking these 3 credit cards, if we can work out before the divorce is even finalized that, they're in your name only by, you've done whatever you need to do and we can get them transferred to you. That's one of the ways that we can work through that and getting it done before the divorce is ever finalized and getting things out of each other's names. That's really where we are. It's a little tough when you're dealing with all of these, especially long-term marriages. You're dealing with 20 years of being together and everything's in each other's names, and now you've got to split it all up, and how do you protect yourself from the other side? And there's not, unfortunately, a whole lot of protections in there without trying to work through those agreements that can unfortunately extend the divorce and trying to get things negotiated out of each other's names before it gets finalized. And then you're putting a whole lot of trust into the other person after a divorce if you're going to start refinancing and doing things after a divorce, though. So
yeah, which is one of the reasons I said a Chapter 13, which is a payment plan bankruptcy, I think is a bad idea for a divorcing couple because, they'll always be tied together by certain things in most cases, especially if there's kids involved. But the last thing I want to saddle them with is, okay, now you're divorced, but you're both tied to each other to make this payment to the Chapter 13 trustee. That, in my mind, is never a good idea. And so sort of the last thing along that vein, one of the things about divorces, they're highly emotional. I get that. But especially when you add kids into the mix and you add child support into the mix and you add alimony. I mean, I think of my parents, for example. My mom was the traditional stay at home, raise the family, didn't work. And so, she would be, I assume, my parents aren't getting divorced, they're in their 70s, but assuming that she would be eligible for alimony because she didn't work. So I know there's guidelines, I know child support, there's formulas and guidelines, but maybe just if you can, like a 50,000-foot basic overview of how child support and alimony factor into some of this stuff.
Sure. So you're right. Child support's done by guidelines, by formula. It's all statutory. We pop in numbers into this formula and it spits out a number of who has to pay who child support. One of the biggest myths about that is that if we share 50-50, time sharing, the other party won't have to pay child support. And that is not necessarily true. It is overnights is one of the things that the formula considers, but it's also based on the net income. It's based on the child income, the tax deductions. It's based on health insurance. It's based on daycare expenses and childcare expenses. And it's based on a lot of numbers that go in that. So it doesn't necessarily equal, 50-50 equal no child support in every situation. It does work out that way if they're relatively close in income, but otherwise it doesn't actually. And so alimony is different because there's no formula for alimony. Our formula is one party has a need and the other party has the ability to pay. That's it. That's the factoring that we have to we pull into it. So we have to figure out what the party's need is and what we're going to ask, and then prove the other party has an ability to pay. So that amount that we're asking for. And so that's it for alimony. And then those things factor in. So actually, they aren't considered in equitable distribution. So equitable distribution gets done first.
Well, and what I was going to ask is, I hear a lot of my friends, and you've said it in your bio, a lot of family law attorneys where there is a trial. I keep thinking, are those the issues at trial? Is that we can't agree on equitable distribution, so judge, please tell us. We can't agree on alimony, so judge, please tell us. Are those the types of issues that there would be a trial over?
Yes, for financial reasons, those are the things that we go to trial over. We can't decide who's getting what and what's equitable in this distribution. So that we go to trial over that. I've had a 2-day trial over nothing but alimony,
Wow.
in one case. And so, yeah, that definitely goes to trial. And then the other main issue is obviously when there's children involved, it's we can't agree on the parenting plan and the time sharing schedule and, who's getting the time when with the kids.
Yeah. And so for those of you that are listening too, under the bankruptcy code, child support, alimony, family support, those kinds of things are not dischargeable. So if the husband is supposed to pay alimony and child support to the wife and the husband files bankruptcy, he would still owe the child support and alimony to the wife. And in fact, I think under the bankruptcy code, he's got to be current on child support and alimony to the wife in order to get his discharge. Or, it obviously would work the other way if the wife were to pay child support and alimony. So those are not dischargeable. The other interesting thing is the attorney's fees that are incurred in getting the child support and alimony are also not dischargeable. So if the court were to say, after trial, wife wins, wife gets alimony, wife gets child support, and the attorney gets X amount of dollars in fees for getting the wife child support and alimony, all of that would not be dischargeable. Now, if the court said wife wins and gets X amount for child support and alimony and gets X amount as the equitable distribution, the attorney's fees potentially for getting the equitable distribution could be discharged in the bankruptcy, but not the child support or alimony. So, Shiobhan, I don't know if you knew this or not, but that's why it's important for you all to keep accurate time records, because if it ends up in my bailiwick and I file the bankruptcy, we might be able to discharge some of the attorney fee if the time records aren't really clear. So that's also something that I look for in my world, just something I didn't know if you knew that or not. So
I did not know that. So that's good to know. That's very interesting to know that, especially when we're going to trial on all of them together. And they're so intertwined and throughout the trial that's going to be interesting to see when that comes along.
Yeah, you got to keep track of that kind of stuff. And I've done both, the husband or the spouse that needs to file the alimony that also needs to file bankruptcy. And I've helped the other end, the spouse that got child support and alimony awarded and the other side isn't paying yet and they've filed bankruptcy, so I need to represent the spouse as a creditor or something like that. So I've done both of those as well. So, again, the links, if you want to contact Shiobhan, the links, oliverolaw.com, OLIVEROLAW.com, oliverolaw.com. Again, Facebook, soliverolaw.com, Shiobhan Olivero Speaks on Facebook. Instagram is Olivero Law and SOS Speaks. LinkedIn is Shiobhan Olivero Attorney on LinkedIn. And then YouTube, it's SOS Speaks and Olivero Law. There's 2 YouTube channels there. Again, the Divorce Workshop, divorceworkshopfl.com. So that's all the places that you can get a hold of Shiobhan if you want or need to talk to her. Again, I'll put all the links in the notes so you can find it that way as well. So before we wrap up here, anything that I missed, anything that you want to add?
No, I think we've covered pretty much everything as far as, debt and divorce and how things get divided and how it's going to go. It's just so important. It's one of the big questions that I get asked all the time, right? Is, we don't have kids and we don't have those things. Do we really need an attorney when going through a divorce? And this is, as you can see, I think from what we've talked about, can still be very convoluted. So my answer is always yes, especially if you've got these things that we've got to address so that we can make sure we put in all the right language, everything that we need to get you as protected as we can, even when we're talking about nothing more than what we call just a financial divorce. That's the divorce without kids.
Do you do, by the way, collaborative divorces? Do you do those?
I have done them, yes.
Okay. So, and I agree with you. I mean, people that want to save on attorney's fees and so they try to do it themselves potentially cause a lot more problems, especially with divorces. I've seen situations where the husband and wife have agreed to split the house, but they don't document it properly within the divorce papers. They don't draft the deed properly. And then you get into issues of, I had one situation where they agreed to split the house, but the deed wasn't correct. and then one of them passed. And so the problem is when you're married, it's as husband and wife. If you put as husband and wife on the deed, and then if one of them were to pass, the other would own the property 100%. But once the divorce comes, even if the deed says as husband and wife, the divorce cuts that off. And so then what happens is one of them passes away, that half has to be probated. And it may not be the ex-spouse that gets the half. So,
Right.
It's always better, go to an attorney, talk to Shiobhan about if you have questions about divorce, and have it done properly versus, you save a couple bucks now, but it's going to cost you a lot more to fix the errors at the end. So it is definitely worth it. So Shiobhan, thank you. I appreciate you being a guest on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Sean. I've enjoyed being here. So thanks for having me as a guest.
Yeah. So again, if you have questions, reach out to Shiobhan. I'll have all the contacts and the links in the notes. If you have questions for me, reach out to me. If you want to check out my new book, that's still over at SeanMYesner.com/become debt free. I think I do have a couple of topics within that book, not on the divorce, but on the debt after the divorce. So that could be another resource for you. So SeanMYesner.com/become debt free. That's there. Otherwise, I think that'll do it for this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. Like I say at the end of every episode, I hope that at the end of the month you have more money rather than at the end of the money you have more month. Thank you all for your time and your listening. Reach out to Shiobhan, reach out to Sam if you have questions about malpractice coverage, or refer him an attorney or title company. He would love that. That'll do it for this week's episode, and we will talk to you in next week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.
If you have questions that you think would make a great topic for a future episode, please email Sean or connect with us on social media. Sean Yesner and Yesner Law, PL, are Florida licensed attorneys. The information contained in this week's episode is not a substitute for legal advice. Your situation may differ, especially if you are located somewhere other than the state of Florida. If you have questions, please contact our office or contact a local attorney. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.